Thank you so much for the audience. I see we are quite an international audience today. I recognize a few names here. Big shout out to our customers in the audience. Carsten, cordially welcome. I also see people that have a national holiday today. So Marco, welcome to the audience. Really appreciate that. Hey, I'm Hendrik. I'm an integration architect for roughly 20 years. And while I do this for 20 years, I still would say I'm an architect in the making. So I'm still learning new stuff every day. And I've been asked to share my thoughts about integrating Salesforce with SAP and the lessons I've learned over the past 25 years. I'm doing that. And I was actually told to keep the attention at a maximum during the talk. I should mention in the very beginning that we will also cover AI topics in this presentation, probably at the end of the slide, and I will try a little live demo. So stay tuned, stay awake. I hope you enjoyed the content. Short agenda, what we will cover in this, but let's just continue. So basically, in the today's digital business environment, we see that it's characterized by complexity. Yeah, we have many applications. We have organizations that rely on so many different systems for the various purposes, for the various business processes. I remember that I read the number that the average enterprise, like obviously large-scale enterprises, run more than 1,200 applications to support their businesses, and the median value is somewhere in the range of 300 to 350 applications. And all these applications hopefully participate somewhere in the process chain and contribute to the success of the company. Now, these systems have emerged, obviously. Some systems are more important than others, and what we see is obviously SAP, especially in Europe, SAP has emerged as the backbone for ERP processes. So everything that is around enterprise resource planning nowadays basically sitting in SAP ECC, which is, if you're familiar with the SAP nomenclatura, SAP ECC is what we typically refer to as the R3 system. It is the core server. We have a more modern release, as you are aware of. There's SAP S4 HANA, which is a rewrite in many aspects, but a very nice addition to that is the in-memory database and the real-time analytic capabilities that SAP HANA really added to the SAP landscape. And one of the rising stars over the last 10 to 15 years is Salesforce in its area of CRM, customer relationship management. So everything around the customer. And all of us probably understand that the customer is the most important aspect in any business today. But bringing all these diverse systems to the best and to have them contribute to the business process, we see some significant integration challenges. And obviously, we need to bridge the gaps between them to enable seamless operations and data flows. Why I'm saying that is because even today, what we see is we see many siloed systems out there, systems that basically don't talk to each other. And siloed systems can create challenges, such as data inconsistency, data redundancy, and inefficient processes in general. Now, the slide you're currently looking at is just showing which kind of objects you probably have to maintain both in Salesforce and SAP as they contribute over the life cycle of your business process to different steps of your business processes. So we have, for example, a product in Salesforce, which most likely is not maintained in Salesforce directly, but it is maintained in SAP. And we have orders and opportunities, and we need to exchange the state of an opportunity and create an order from that and update the state again in Salesforce. And if we just look at these systems and think they are like independent and can do whatever they want, our customers will actually have a really bad experience. And like all of us, when we consume services from our providers, like in our private lives, we expect them to deliver a end-to-end seamless experience when we do business with them. Whether you procure a new service on Netflix, or you watch a video on Amazon, or you buy stuff on Alibaba, it is really all about that user experience, that you enter your data once, and the goods are shipped, all the services are delivered in time, and everything works beautiful. Yeah, so you're not getting overcharged. The product is of the quality you expect. The deliveries in time, all these kind of things. If your systems are siloed, you as an enterprise will not be able to deliver on that promise, and your customers will be very, very unhappy if you're not able to synchronize their data. So you move to a new address, and the goods are still shipped to the old address. Not the best experience your customers will have, and you probably have lost at that stage a long-term customer and their repeating business. So bottom line of that slide really is keep that in mind, and working in silos really prevents organizations from maximizing their potential. Yeah, it hampers collaboration, productivity, business outcome eventually. So that is why we at Integration Matters, we think actually integration matters. Yeah, so we really want to overcome now, as Kai said, for more than 18 years. Now we really want to help our customers to overcome the challenges of siloed systems. We want the organizations we work with to understand the value of integration and how that can help them scaling the business. We want to facilitate data consistency, establish a single source of truth, which only can be accomplished if you seamlessly integrate your systems. We want to help you streamline your processes, improve efficiencies, have real-time visibility into your order status. Just from a personal experience, when I shop online, I really like being able to track in real time what the status of my order is, where the goods are, whether they are with the freight forwarder, if they're on their way to me. And being able to provide that real-time visibility will increase the stickiness of your company, of your customers with your company, but it will also help your employees to work more efficiently. And finally, obviously, you will gain valuable insights once you're able to report across all the different applications you have in-house. You will be able to take better decisions. So that is really the mission statement at Integration Matters, and why we believe integration matters. And so it also matters between SAP and Salesforce. Now, as you figured, this is a MuleSoft meetup. Obviously, at some point, we have to talk about MuleSoft. So MuleSoft, as you know, is also like for 10, 15 years in the market right now. And as of today, it is providing a robust integration platform. And it helps thousands and thousands of companies out there to integrate their disparate systems they currently have. So whatever system you think of, MuleSoft most likely has a connector, can connect to it. And with the advent of MuleSoft, we also have the advent of the API-led architecture, where we think contract first again. So we think about the purpose of an interface. We describe the interface very nicely in RAML and describe the intent that we have. So the service we want to invoke and whether we want to update data or read data and so on. And why we do that, we not only enable all of a sudden legacy systems to communicate more seamlessly, but we also effectively decouple them. So we move away from spaghetti code. We ensure efficient communication and data exchange between these applications and have more and more users on these applications. So in this scenario, when we talk about how can we integrate Salesforce and SAP, obviously, as we have the MuleSoft meetup here, I will not talk about the direct built-in integration tools that are available right in Salesforce. Obviously, I will mention them, but not really talk about them in depth. And the same for SAP. So we all know that they have some point-to-point capabilities, but let's think a bit bigger and think about not just connecting these two systems, but preparing our landscape to be more flexible and unlock the data also for other scenarios. An architecture presentation by an architect, by a seasoned architect, really, if I don't put an architecture slide in front of you, that should scare you. So here is like a full-blown MuleSoft architecture. If you're familiar with the MuleSoft terminology, you will see the backend systems at the bottom in the south and the consumers in the north of the slide. We have the system API layer, which connects to all the backend systems, and and harmonizes and mediates the proprietary protocols and data structures into easy to consume services on their northern side here. And then we have a layer that is referred to as the process API layer, where we have all our business logic, basically. Here is where we decide to route data, to schedule data flows, to stitch together all the different scenarios. And this is where the reuse will happen. If you've ever heard about the pitch, how to reuse interfaces and so on. So we do expect that the many process APIs we build will reuse the many system APIs layers we have. And we also will see that process APIs are able basically to call other process APIs. The objective of the presentation after setting the stage really is I really want to show the stuff that we've learned when we integrated SAP ECC as well as SAP S4 HANA and Salesforce. And to do that, I will talk you through the typical integration patterns that we have, a slight journey through object mappings and object lifecycles, and how we can eventually achieve, hopefully, a seamless integration and how we can optimize the business processes. All right, so let's talk about the 4 most common integration patterns we see. I'm not going to reference the book EAI Patterns and Enterprise Application Integration Patterns because that book is like referenced in every presentation you see when it comes to integration. I will just highlight like the 4 most predominant integration scenarios we have. So number 1 is we have the synchronous integration approach. And synchronous really means, hey, we get an immediate response. We have two-way communication. It's request response in real time. And this is particularly useful in scenarios where you require quick data validation or where transaction confirmation is necessary immediately. So like in an e-shop, yeah. So you immediately want to give the feedback, yes, payment was processed, goods are ordered, it's on their way. So use this integration pattern whenever you have the need to provide promptly and immediate feedback to your users. And the other pro of that is if communication fails, the client already understands that the transaction failed and they can implement an error handling routine. Yeah, so like in my little picture here, if the connection drops, either side will call the other, or if the connection is bad or don't understand, either side can ask the other side to repeat, please, or use another phone number. All of us have used that. Hey, the connection is bad. Please switch to a landline. Yeah, so think about this. Synchronous integration is really tightly coupling application, having immediate feedback, and it's really a high quality service for the consumer. So it's a very nice integration pattern. Obviously, the counterpart of that is asynchronous integration, and we have all done that. Yeah, the classic call on my way home. I typically get a phone call saying, hey, when you come home, please bring milk and eggs. So what that really means is my wife doesn't really want me to return home right now. But when I'm on my way home, please stop by the supermarket and collect some of the food so we can have dinner. So asynchronous really means is you can dispatch the work to an endpoint, and you don't really care about when the work is completed. So you can really use this for non-critical tasks that don't require your immediate response. Yeah, so this is like sending back emails, notifications, schedule work in a backend system. The nice thing about that is that the client can just dispatch the work, and you can say, okay, I understood the work item you gave me. I really understand what I need to do. I'm happy to do it, but I'm just not ready to do it right now. So this is really nice for efficient processing of non-time sensitive tasks. So whenever you have such a task, think about asynchronous integration. Now, asynchronous integration is a two-sided metal or sword, which means because it is asynchronous, you don't necessarily know the outcome of the transaction. Yeah, so the caller has no idea when a transaction is completed or when it is failing or actually when it is even scheduled for work. So if you build asynchronous integration, that also means you have to think about, hey, how can you report on status? How do you notify your client that a transaction failed? Will you implement webhooks, for example? Will you implement a status interface? So building asynchronous integration is in the end is more complex than it looks like at the surface. It's easy to just you just use MuleSoft, you plug in the async scope, and things are asynchronous. Hey, that's great. But as an architect, we need to consider, like, what do we do when the job is done, and what do we do if we fail, or if we just have a partial success? Synchronous, asynchronous. Okay, number 3 in our standard integration scenarios is batch integration. Batch integration really is suitable for moving a large amount of data. So you understand the amount of data you move is so large, you don't really want to wait for it to be processed, and you just want to hand it over. And the system should find a very convenient time to process it, but then it needs to be processed in a batch. Yeah, so EDI scenarios are very typical for this. Like you export files with thousands and hundred thousands of transactions, but they need to be processed in the entity of a file. Yeah, so that is really batch processing, and MuleSoft supports that again using the batch components inside MuleSoft. And batch processing is very efficient for processing large volumes of data, and to just queue them internally and then process them during off-peak hours to minimize the impact on system performance of other systems. So you probably don't want to do a batch import job into the SAP system right at 9 o'clock in the morning when everyone wants to work with the system. So you probably should schedule that for like 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning. Yeah. So again, it's very nice handing off data, really mass data. So I think the biggest difference between batch integration and asynchronous integration here is, while they're similar in nature, when we talk about asynchronous integration, we talk about a smaller data set. Yeah, fewer records you send over, whereas in batch integration, we easily talk about files in the size of gigabytes that need to be processed asynchronously. But the same downsides that we have learned from the asynchronous integration obviously also happen in the batch integration. Yeah, so in batch, you also need to think about, how can I report on state? How can I report errors? How can I report success? Do I need to think about replaying this, like rescheduling the batch if it wasn't successful? All of these kind of things need to go into these considerations also. And then obviously, hopefully I've waited for that. The 4th integration pattern is the event-driven integration. So it's also called real-time integration. It's basically when everything's happening in the backend, you want to immediately trigger an event and distribute that information about a business event in your organization. So you probably have an update to an account, an update to the state of an opportunity in Salesforce, and you immediately need to inform and notify other systems so that other systems can act on that information, again, in real time. So event-driven architectures used to be a big thing about like 5 years ago, when then MuleSoft came along and stole the thunder and came up with the idea of API-led. But we see that move again, that event-driven integration is becoming more important again. And these are the 4 most important integration patterns that you will encounter. I think that's the summary here when you integrate Salesforce and SAP. The seasoned architect in the calls here understand there are a few more integration approaches that you can have, but these 4 are the ones you will see the most when you connect these 2 systems. Now, having talked about the patterns itself, I really wanted to look now into what are the SAP integration options we have. And then I will talk about the Salesforce integration options we have. SAP from top to bottom, really, I think everyone knows about PIPO. It is like it originated as SAP XI. It was a NetWeaver stack. It was rebranded a couple of times. It's now called the process integration, process orchestration layer in SAP, and it is robust and customizable. Robust as in, I think it's in SAP available for more than 20 years now. It started in the early 2000 years, and it typically is used in the 3 scenarios of synchronous, asynchronous, and batch integration. Typical use cases are still SOA and B2B scenarios, EDI exchanges. Just when we look back in time, when it was done the first time, this was when XML was the big thing. So before JSON, everything was XML. It was SOAP for transports. And this is where PIPO still shines today. So if you are encountering an existing SAP landscape you have to integrate with, chances are very, very high that you will encounter web services, SOAP web services, and you have to integrate with SAP via PIPO. lately, again, with the advent of SAP S4 HANA, and I understand with the latest additions on the SAP ECC gateway hosts, gateway services, actually, we have OData services. And OData is a standardized API on how to query and return data. It has a predefined query language that is across all OData implementations. So not only SAP will understand your query language, but OData query language. But for example, if you need to integrate with systems like Navision, Business Central, they also have OData interfaces. You can use everything you've learned and apply that to these interfaces also. And so if you have to do with a more modern system, more modern SAP systems, again, chances are high that you will have OData services that you can query to retrieve data. Now, keep in mind, the SAP PIPO can be used for inbound and outbound communication. So you can invoke outbound communication from inside SAP to trigger actions, and you can receive inbound requests. The OData services are really REST APIs that are designed for external clients to be queried by external clients. So OData services themselves will not initiate communication. They just sit there and wait for your call to do stuff. So they can be implemented on the SAP side to support synchronous, asynchronous, event-driven, and batch interfaces. So they're really flexible. Like I said, it's the latest edition, very modern interfaces, nicely supported via the SAP connector of MuleSoft, and I can highly recommend using them. And probably just remind me by the end of the presentation a lesson learned about using the SAP connector for S4 HANA and the OData services, how to use them to not run into out-of-memory exceptions and these kind of things. IDOCs, the famous IDOCs are with SAP. I think they have been made available in the R2 releases in the late 70s, early 80s already. And it is the intermediate document exchange. It's like an EDI document. It's in XML format, and it is the de facto standard data structure to exchange data between SAP systems. So SAP comes with a huge amount of standard IDOCs to export and import data. And like all of you have probably heard about the orders, the order response, the MATMAS, the RDRMAS, all these different IDOC types that are used to exchange data between SAP and external systems. Now, IDOCs in nature are asynchronous. So it is an intermediate document. It means it is prepared in a staging area of SAP. It is then sent to a destination, and that destination can be whatever you want. It can be an HTTP endpoint. It can be a file system. It can be Mule to send it to MuleSoft. But the SAP processing logic will not stop. So it will create the IDOC and move on. And when you post an IDOC to SAP, it will sit in a staging area and it will get processed whenever SAP finds it convenient to process your IDOC. So in nature, it is asynchronous. You will not get a synchronous response from SAP when you have to use an IDOC. Be aware of that. If your SAP architect tells you IDOC is the only interface, you immediately understand it is always asynchronous in nature and there's nothing you can do about it. The nice thing about the interface, however, is it supports batches. So you can really create massive files of IDOC documents and send them into SAP, and SAP would chew through them, which is very nice. So nothing you need to be worried about to overload the system and so on, because it's all managed by SAP. Now, the bad thing about using that interface in SAP is when you post an IDOC into SAP, as I said, there's a staging area. The staging area is not visible to MuleSoft. So we hand over the IDOC and SAP basically responds and says, okay, thank you for the IDOC. So as long as your structure is correct, it will just accept the IDOC. And it is an asynchronous interface. That means it is processing in the background. And it will never report back if the processing failed or not. And while the IDOC is sitting inside the staging area and it's not posted into the application in SAP, the data you send is not visible to any business user. So be aware of that in some scenarios, You may have proof in your log files that you posted the IDOC, but the business user will still not see the data. And then the most likely reason is that it's sitting inside that staging area, and you need an SAP administrator, right, to look into that staging area and understand what's going wrong. And common things are like zip code validation fails, for example, or a product is unknown. You created a sales order, but the product is unknown. That's all the reasons why I don't get stuck there. Another programming interface in SAP, the BAPIs, the Business Application Programming Interface. Again, in SAP, there's a huge selection of predefined function modules, also known as BAPIs, which you can use, for example, to create business partners, to create sales orders, purchase orders, update material. And in real life, again, you will see a lot of customized function modules here, BAPIs, that the SAP team has created to accommodate for the specific needs of the business. So there's a very high chance when you have to integrate with SAP that the team will either give you a customized IDOC or a customized BAPI that you have to call to invoke a certain function. Now, BAPIs are all inbound. There's no outbound BAPI, really. While still in the ABAP code, you could do some outbound logic, but that's not the idea of a BAPI. The BAPI really should just be called by MuleSoft to post data or even retrieve data from SAP. But for if you want to have synchronous operations, that is typically where the RFC comes in. Now, the nice thing about an RFC is it is a remote function call that invokes basically a function module into SAP. And this is both synchronous and asynchronous. It works pretty much like the BAPI, but the nice thing here is you can register MuleSoft as being a RFC destination. So from a coding perspective, the SAP coder would just work on the RFC and invoke a MuleSoft function as if that would be an internal SAP function. Yeah, it really externalizes that call into MuleSoft, and then you can do whatever you want behind that. So the programmer makes a decision whether it should be synchronous or asynchronous from within SAP, and you can like pretend being another SAP system that can serve that request. So these are the RFCs. There's one more interface, the file transfer, obviously, like when you do your evaluation, when you understood your non-functional requirements, whether you should do it asynchronously, synchronously, batch-driven, or event-driven, and nothing else is satisfying what it can do. The last resort is always the file transfer. Like I said, for example, IDOCs can be spooled to disk and then transferred as files, and they can be imported and exported as files. So the file transfer typically is your last resort. Now, using the file transfer basically means SAP exported the data. They have no idea when it's getting picked up. They don't really expect asynchronous response or a response in near time. Typically, I try to stay away from file transfers, simply for the reason I hate file transfers. There's so much overhead with managing the files and archiving them and creating error files and returning the status and all these kind of things. So if you have a chance, stay away from them. But if you stay away from them and all the other options, and the only other option that remains is natively accessing the database of SAP, in that case, use the file transfer. Yeah, so please do not try to read the native database tables. There may be like edge scenarios where that is acceptable, but typically I would like to have all architects in this room to agree to not really read directly from the tables, apart from these very, very, very few edge cases. Now, if you need to read from a database table, there is a built-in RFC in SAP. It is the RFC read table RFC. Yeah, so take that as a note. RFC read table, that's the name. When you look up the SAP notes, it will say with a high warning on the first page, it will say, do not ever use this. This is not supported. We will not support you on using this and everything. However, it is in the system for almost 20 years. SAP acknowledged that a lot of the SAP internal behavior relies on the RFC nowadays, and a lot of third-party applications rely on the RFC. So while By the function module, read table is not officially supported. They still give out bug fixes, and over the past years, SAP has become a bit easier on supporting this. So when you read up about this module, be aware. I told you it says it's not supported, but it works very well. And there's a lot of documentation actually out there how to use it. And I use it also. Yeah. So use the RFC read table before you open HABC connection and try to read from the table themselves. Yeah. Apart from these extra edge cases I talked about before. All right, let's talk about Salesforce integration options. So actually, I'm just checking time. I think I'm good in time here. So Salesforce integration options are very easy because they're like compared to the options we have on the SAP side, we would say they're quite limited. All of us know Salesforce is a SaaS system, so it's run in the cloud. Whereas SAP typically is something you run on premise, or okay, so maybe you run it as a hosted service, but typically you know the data center where it's running, and there's a lot of security around it, and all these kind of things. But Salesforce, you don't have an option. It is always provisioned in the cloud. It's a shared tenant, and the only way to get data in and out of Salesforce is using the REST API. So whatever tool you use and whatever thing you're doing under the hoods, it's always the REST API. And the good thing about that is the documentation for the REST API is really, really good. Yeah. So on the Salesforce web pages, when you search for the APIs, you will see it is really well documented. It has a lot of documentation around it, examples around it, and it's really easy to understand. So the go-to place for integrating with Salesforce is always using the REST API. And I mean, guess what? The MuleSoft connector under the covers is using the REST API. Yeah. So if you ever set up the connection string, it will ask you like for the SOAP endpoint or for the web service endpoint to connect to. And that is the strong hint that even the MuleSoft connector is always using the REST API. And for one exception, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. And so use it for your integration tasks to get data into SAP, into Salesforce, and get data out of Salesforce. All the CRUD operations are here supported. You can have asynchronous communication. You can have synchronous communication, and asynchronous, the famous bug API, for example, and that is really, really nice because you can actually schedule a bug request in Salesforce to like either you give it like 100,000 records and say, okay, please process them as a bug. But you can also ask it to prepare an export and asynchronously, and then you just query the status of that export job. And once the data is collected and available, then you can again use the REST API to download the result of that bug job. So it's a really sophisticated API. You probably hear I'm really excited. I really like the API, the way it is designed. And that's the way how to do things, actually. So many companies can learn from how to do this. There's another mechanism inside Salesforce to detect changes. So if typically we want to trigger actions in other systems when data is changed in our system, and Salesforce has a built-in CDC mechanism. If there are any SAP architects in the room, I know SAP has the same thing. It's called a change pointer. I just didn't evaluate on that in my integration options. But here in SAP, in Salesforce, a CDC is really a nice thing because it generates what is called a platform event. And that event has all the changes, and it basically says, okay, this object has been changed, like this object type, this under this Salesforce ID has been changed, and here are the fields that have been changed. And now you can decide what you want to do with this. And whether you want to integrate Salesforce to Salesforce or Salesforce to another system, you can easily subscribe to these events. And because it is like by reference, you can then make a decision and either retrieve the full object or just propagate the changed key fields that are in that message. Now, and here's the exception to what I said, the Salesforce connector. Salesforce connector is not always using the REST API. If you subscribe to the platform events, it is actually using gRPC underneath nowadays. It is a bandwidth optimized eventing and data transport protocol. Yeah, you probably have heard about gRPC. gRPC will replace all the commodity interfaces in Salesforce. And that is when you use the the MuleSoft pub/sub connector for Salesforce. Under the covers, it is using gRPC and not the REST API. Probably that are just technical details, but it's nice to know that MuleSoft is using the latest technology that Salesforce actually is offering you. And eventually, they are the Apex Web Services, and they come in as the last thing, because that is probably the area I have the least experience with. I understand we can write Apex code to define the behavior and have exit points and provide service endpoints in Salesforce. Again, I would consider this like as a last resort. If nothing else really works for you, or I know we are in the MuleSoft Meetup, if for some reason you don't want to use or you cannot use an integration platform like MuleSoft, then you maybe think about using Apex code to directly connect systems with Salesforce. Yeah, so because Apex can be used to make HTTP calls, SOAP calls to other endpoints. Use all the internal Salesforce technology also, like all the byte processing that I mentioned before. And these are the three integration options we really have with Salesforce. Yeah, so it's REST APIs. It is the platform events. Platform events, by the way, are both inbound and outbound. Yeah, so MuleSoft can generate events and publish them into Salesforce, and Salesforce will process them as messages. So it's very, very powerful for one-to-many communication inside Salesforce also. They're really, really, really viable integration option. All right, so we talked about integration patterns, integration options we have with SAP, integration options with Salesforce. So let's look at the business process. The order to cash, like this is how companies make money. They sell products and they invoice customers and get payments at the end. And here's a selection, and this is just a sub-selection of objects that participate in a typical order to cash process. Yeah, from the left to the right, you will have the account, which is our customer in SAP. Yeah, we have the product, which is material, including prices. We have an opportunity, like if you're familiar with how things are staged in Salesforce, we have opportunities, quotes, an order, we generate the sales orders, we have a delivery date, we have to query SAP again for the available for sale and available to promise dates, yeah, for the commit dates. We have to communicate with our logistics partner for the delivery. We have an invoicing system, we have a payment system, and all of that data, all of these objects that really participate in this end-to-end process. If we do it right, if we integrate Salesforce and SAP right, is what we can create is the 360-degree customer order status. So we really understand what is the current status we have with that customer, what is the history, and so on. So that is basically the goal. Yeah. So in the very beginning, the order to cash process, it typically starts in Salesforce, like I said, where the customer account management takes place. So you create the account in Salesforce, you maintain the account typically in Salesforce, and then you synchronize that with SAP. We have to maintain accurate customer information in Salesforce, so that delivery addresses, payment information, and so on is all accurate, and the goods are shipped to the right place, and we can actually collect our money. Once we have the account, we can create opportunities in Salesforce. I mean, obviously, you can skip that step, but typically you create an opportunity representing a potential sales deal. So inside the opportunity, we have products or services we want to sell. And the only way Salesforce can know about the products and services we want to sell is by the system that maintains products and services and prices, actually to make that data available for us. Yeah, so that is why we send material pricing and other data from SAP to Salesforce, and need to synchronize that. And so the opportunity goes, you have the offer, you negotiate, and so on, and eventually the quote is won. Hopefully it is won. And then we move on to the next step where we schedule the delivery. We create the sales order, we schedule the delivery, and all these things. So just in the end, just skip this step, because I said that already. And eventually the payment receipt then typically is recorded in SAP. So the most payment solutions nowadays are connected to SAP. I totally understand you also have payment providers in Salesforce, and you can connect all the payment providers in Salesforce. The reality, however, is in B2B businesses nowadays, payment providers are typically connected to the SAP system. So the receipt is recording in SAP, the general ledger is updated, the order book is updated, everything's updated. But that change now is also propagated back into Salesforce, so that when we check the customer back in Salesforce, we exactly see what the credit limit is, what the exposure is we currently have, and if we can sell any more goods. Yeah, very important. We see the payment history, all these kind of things. So the more accurate the data is, the better we can work with the customer, and the more valued customers typically feel. So if we understand the customer is doing business with us every week or once a month, obviously, and we will be able to treat them in a better way, and probably be more flexible on things, and then will generate high satisfaction and repeated business with these customers. All right, so that is all from a process perspective. Yeah, so again, think about all of this and check for all of the life cycles of all these objects. Hey, when the account is created in Salesforce, is it a good idea to collect all the updates to an account for a month and then do a batch update in SAP? Is that good enough? Does that satisfy my requirement? Or should I do this like in real time? Should this be synchronous? Should I, whenever someone is registering via the website, via my shop, should I immediately create the account in SAP? Is that required? Does my business process require that? Or is that an SLA I want to demonstrate to my users? Whenever pricing is changed, like, do I want to see the prices being updated immediately on my webpage? Yeah, should they become effective immediately? Or is this something I can schedule? Like in SAP, you typically plan your pricing way in advance, and they become effective on a certain day. So again, the question is, do I need to propagate this in real time when the price changes are made, or is it okay to do it overnight? And a small hint from my end here is pricing very often is done in marketing campaigns where you just discount a certain category of goods by a certain percentage, and that could easily lead to hundreds of thousands of new prices here. Yeah, so think about that if you need to do this in real time or with a batch or bulk interface. Probably would satisfy the requirement. That's the whole reason why I was talking about integration scenarios and patterns in the beginning. Yeah, so that is what we need to do in every step of this process. Now, moving on, just looking at the life cycle of an object. Let's talk about the account. Typically, an account is, as was said, an account is typically created in Salesforce. I mean, Salesforce is the customer relationship management tool, and that is where you would maintain your customer data. And so you would create the account in Salesforce, you would update and maintain it in Salesforce, and you would even retire it in Salesforce. But as soon as you create the account, it needs a twin in your ERP system for order fulfillment, for example. So you need to create either a business partner or a customer master data record in SAP. Yeah. And whenever there's a change, you need to reflect that change, obviously, in the SAP system again, and address change, a change in the company name, probably a change in the order structure. So whatever you perceive as important for the account, think about that you really want to synchronize that with SAP. Now, what's interesting about the account is that in virtually all the engagements I have been, when I ask the customer, like, who owns the account, like who's that single person or that single organization that is allowed to maintain an account, I get very diverse answers. Yeah, typically no one can really tell me, yeah, it's that person or that person, because the reality is that typically an account in its entirety is not maintained or owned by a single system or by a single person. Very often it is just a subset of attributes. Yeah, so say the customer name, their primary address, and their credit limit is probably maintained in Salesforce. But other characteristics like the risk category, the classification, the market segment, these kind of things are probably maintained in SAP. Yeah. And or the relationship you have with the customer. So whether they are a supplier or a customer, whether they are a logistics partner, all these kind of things. That is maybe maintained in SAP and not so much in the CRM system. So what we find out is that there's not that single system that has the single source of truth. So what we need to do in that scenario is when we use MuleSoft to integrate and synchronize this, we can implement rules now in MuleSoft and say, okay, the account updated in Salesforce, but I understand I must not overwrite the data that is in SAP for these few attributes because they are owned and maintained in SAP. Say, for example, the risk category. Yeah, so this is, or the market classification or the distribution channel or whatever, because they are owned and maintained in SAP. And the other way around. So now the business partner has been updated in SAP. And we can now implement the rule in MuleSoft saying, hey, in SAP, we do not maintain the customer name. So we will not update the customer name in Salesforce. And by implementing this way, we can still synchronize the objects and enforce that distributed ownership that the customer is asking for us. And yes, it is not that transparent in the interface. It is not that easy to maintain, but it is doable and achievable. And that is always our prime focus, to deliver value to our customers. What we can also do in MuleSoft then is on just remember that architecture slide I showed before. Now we can implement, because we have integrated Salesforce and SAP, we can implement a process API that is exposing accounts or customers behind a GET API. And behind the scenes, MuleSoft can now query Salesforce and SAP and enrich the data from using both systems and return the consolidated account record on the REST interface. So this is a very powerful design to be able to consolidate the data to show how the object that is discretely managed in multiple different systems as a one unified object. Some would say a CDM object, basically. But I'm not saying that right. Yeah, so a really powerful architecture designs here. So now the account is created. Sorry, you see I'm getting excited about accounts also. Now we do business with the account. So we have transactions, and transactions are typically like sales we do with the account, or purchases we have if they're a supplier. And we really want to have the commercial history with that account in Salesforce. That means whenever there's a transaction, whether that is recorded in Salesforce or SAP, and now this is really coming into whether you have Commerce Cloud, for example, by Salesforce, or if you do everything via SAP, or maybe you have a Shopify system or something. But we really want to have the sales history, the commercial history with that account in the CRM system. Yeah, we really want to understand the revenue we've made with the account in different dimensions, like by month, by quarter, by year. We want to see the communication between the customer and ours. We want to understand which products they already have to understand what are the upsell opportunities. And when they call us, we really need to understand which machinery, for example, they have installed and of which classification the machinery has. So we understand which manuals are required, which skill set is required to maintain the equipment on the customer side. That is why it's so important to have the transactions in sync and do this in real time. We are living in a real-time world. So if I procure a service right now from any of the services out there and they are able to provision it in real time, I really want to be able to file a support request within the next 30 minutes if things don't work out for me. Yeah, don't delay this. Yeah, make this real time. Synchronize transactions as quickly as you can. Will ease your life. And eventually, unfortunately, you probably have to deactivate an account. I'm saying deactivation because both Salesforce and SAP, I mean, Salesforce can actually physically delete records, but SAP cannot. So in SAP, you can just flag it for deletion, and that typically means it's end of life and it's blocked for any future business activity. But again, it's important to have this flag really being transported in real time so that if one decision maker takes a decision to block a customer and stall, basically suspend the business relationship, that no other organization can still make business and accidentally ship goods, for example, to a bankrupt company. Yes, so do this in real time. All right, these are the scenarios I really wanted to talk about. Challenges. The challenges we have is data consistency. Like in the very beginning, just remember what I said about the magnitude, the problem it has, like how many applications are out there. And then even if we just look at Salesforce and SAP, how many data objects we have to move and the challenges we have with data consistency. Data consistency also means potential duplicates. Yeah, you have the same customer in the system probably 5 times, registered under different names, under different addresses. But effectively, yeah, they are the same customer. I have a very nice example with the customer I'm currently working with. It's an international company. They have plants virtually in every country, and they have suppliers in every country, but sometimes they have the same supplier for different countries, obviously. Yeah, so they source something in Germany for the plants in France and Switzerland and in Italy. And in France and Switzerland and in Italy, the same supplier is registered in the country-specific SAP systems as a supplier. So now they think they have 3 suppliers, but when in reality it is only 1, and they get actually different prices for the different countries from the same supplier for the same material. Like previously, they have not been able to report on that. They couldn't consolidate. They couldn't understand that the good they're buying in France is the same good from a specification perspective, from a supplier perspective, that they buy in Italy, and they pay different price. And now they are able to remove this redundancy and understand it's the same supplier, it's the same physical supplier. So now they can negotiate much better prices. Yeah. So data consistency. Yeah, there's business opportunity in here. Error handling is a huge challenge. Remember what I said about asynchronous data processing, about how do I notify, whom do I notify and when about errors, how do I consolidate error messages, how do I deal with mass errors? Remember that file, 1 million transactions in a file, and every single line fails during import. Do you really want to create 1 million error messages? Is that the way forward, or are there smarter ways? So you need to sit together with the customer and with the smartest brains in your organization to come up with a proper error handling routine here. And I think we have some time after my presentation. Hopefully we still have time after my presentation, and we can have an open discussion of what you think, what proper error handling should involve and what it should look like. Performance is important. Sometimes the performance, well, I typically pick on SAP here, but sometimes the SAP performance is not that great that you actually can do things synchronously without really annoying your user in the front end. Like if querying a material in real time from SAP always is like 5 seconds, and the customer needs to add 20 items, of which he the 20 items he usually purchases from you, and he needs to put them into his shopping cart over and over again, and that just takes 100 seconds, they will get annoyed. So we need to talk about performance. We need to understand what is the SLA wanting me, what are the systems capable of doing, and when do they have actually processing time available for us. And eventually we need to talk about security. So if we find time after my presentation, just think about questions, stuff you want to contribute. I mean, this is a meetup. It shouldn't be a lecture. I really encourage you to share stuff you've seen, you've done, stuff you've been proud of, stuff you think that really shouldn't be done, and just share it. Either in the chat, via email, whatever, we can recap in the next meetup or in today's session. Yeah, I would really appreciate that discussion. All right, third scenario. After the business process and the object, let's talk about MuleSoft support during migration of SAP, because that's a big topic nowadays. I have my SAP R3 ECC system, and I really need to now move to SAP S4 HANA. And what can we do? I mean, obviously we have some planning up front, to no surprise. So we need to understand what are the key integration points, what is the critical data that needs to be moved. Actually, we need to understand what is the rollout plan of the SAP team. And are they looking for a big bang approach, or are they looking for a parallel run architecture? Yeah, where they move business function by business function. And if they do this, all of a sudden we need to have the S4 system in sync with the SAP ECC system. And so on top of having this all in synchronization with Salesforce. Yeah? So we just add one more system. So we need to understand which system here now is responsible for which data object, because when you migrate in a parallel run architecture, there's a certain cutoff date for, say, example, for the business partners. And the one day you have it in ECC, the next day it is all done in S4. And we need to prepare an architecture in MuleSoft to support that we can easily swap out the system of record and say, hey, you know what, customers no longer come from this system, they now come from a different endpoint. But we don't really want to rewire our architecture just because we have a new system here. And I have a little architecture slide actually after these slides where I can discuss this. Probably have a solution in mind already, given the previous architecture slide I shared. I just want to re-emphasize this on the 2 or 3 slides from here. All right, let's talk about data migration. Sometimes you want to carry over data from ECC to S4. And what we have done with great success in the past is we just used MuleSoft's data weave transformation engine to convert mass data. Yeah, it's I know you can do so many things in migrating data, but because we typically, like if we have the parallel run architecture, we typically build the interfaces in MuleSoft anyway, and we have the data mappings anyway because we need to keep these systems in sync. So why not use the same transformation rules to do the initial loads during the data migration? Yeah. So while you do this, just think of the reuse. Always think about the data migration, about the initial load. Whenever you connect to a system, do yourself a favor. Always think about, hey, it could be mass data being transferred here. It's probably not only a single record, but define interfaces to always be able to deal with large amount of data. Externalize the data weave mappings, have them in separate files so we can reuse them in multi-different scenarios. Yeah, so always have data migration and initial loads on your plan, on your project plan. And eventually, obviously, during the migration, we need to integrate with other systems. But that is something we have hopefully done. And this is what this slide is about. So on the bottom line, what we see is we have the different SAP systems. Yeah, we have SAP with the orders object, we have SAP pricing, the availability, we have other pricing and availability in HANA. Let's just focus on the left side for now. So let's assume we just have SAP and we want to introduce and migrate to S4 HANA. So what we will do in a proper architecture in MuleSoft, we probably already had integrated SAP with a subsystem API. And we are using that API from a process layer, which we called orders API. So we can use the orders API to create orders, query orders, update orders. Whatever we really need to do with the orders is, like from a business point of view, is encapsulated in this process layer. And now we need to support also S4 HANA. So S4 HANA comes along as a new system we need to connect to. So what we can do is we will either using the existing system API, or we will clone a system API from here and reuse the northbound interfaces and connect to the S4 system. And now we can easily extend our orders API to route traffic to the old system as long as the old system is in charge of orders. And then we can do the cutoff and say, okay, on the migration day, we reconfigure this either via a property or by logic and get the data from here. So a good example would be that if we have a get orders interface here and we know the cutoff date is July 1st, if someone is requesting orders before July 1st, we know all these orders do exist in this old system. They're maintained in the system, so we just query the system on the left. And new orders will automatically all be created in the new system. And all queries starting from July 1st will go to the new endpoint. By doing this, we can easily swap in and swap out new systems underneath our system APIs without jeopardizing any of the processes we have built on top of this. And now you probably understand why encapsulation and the layers are so important from a MuleSoft perspective. Yeah, if we properly define these layers and have the invocations between these layers, then we gain great flexibility down here, not only bringing in SAP and replacing that with SAP S4HANA, but we could also just replace, like in 2 years from here, S4HANA with a BAN system or Microsoft Dynamics or whatever we really want to do here. And that wouldn't change a single thing north of the system API. Yeah, so this is really powerful. And when you are facing a migration scenario, I highly encourage you to talk to your managers, to your decision makers, and propose an architecture like that. Go the extra mile, build this extra system API, have the logic updated here to deal with the expected change in the system APIs. And then you will have a seamless cutover day, because from a MuleSoft perspective, you have done everything. You don't have a cutover day. the stress will all be down here with the other application owners. All right. That is my final architecture slide, actually. So what did I learn? Common pitfalls, like 20 years of integrating with SAP. And to no surprise, obviously, the number one thing is unclear requirements. And by unclear, I really mean everything that can be unclear. It is about as simple as to how do I connect to the SAP system? Like, which gateway do I use? Which client do I use? What are my credentials? What are the security constraints around this? All the way to who owns the record? Which attributes need to be updated? Are there any mapping tables involved? I mean, just remember, SAP internally is using identifiers all over the place. It is a 100% normalized data model. Yeah. So if you need to denormalize, if you want to understand what order type TA is, you better need to go to the lookup table and understand what TA stands for. If you want to understand what a certain delivery condition is, you need a lookup table, because you probably don't know what code 01 stands for. Yeah. So everything that can be unclear, typically in SAP, is unclear. Data code mappings, inbound communication, outbound communication, data structures. If you ever deal with SAP, I've never seen a system that requires so much upfront due diligence around getting requirements cleared and aligned, and spend your time here. It's going to save your project in the long run. You probably hear that for every project, but unclear requirements is the number one thing you need to tackle. And unfortunately, has nothing to do with technology. Yeah, it is just people. Data inconsistencies. I talked about redundant data. Duplication, the same supplier in 3 systems, and you don't know it's the same supplier. Sometimes we see the same material being registered multiple times because people don't understand it's the same material. No idea how to clean the data. That can yield massive problems. So if you have a data steward, a data architect on board in the team, lucky you, talk to them, try to identify how you can get rid of data inconsistencies. Salesforce has great tools to deal with this. So probably reach out to them and ask them how to create master data records, how to get a golden record. You probably want to talk about MDM solutions, Smarchi, whatever out there, to get rid of the data inconsistencies. And actually, during the data migration, which you probably have to do, getting rid of data inconsistency is vital, because otherwise you will not understand if your import is complete and consistent. Yeah, so take of that. That is the number 2 pitfall we typically see. Performance issues. Many of our customers have no idea about the data they need to move in the beginning, and then all of a sudden systems are either undersized or oversized. Yeah, so you buy too many CPUs, which is a waste of money, or you get performance issues, which is a waste of time. And so you need to get a good understanding about what is the amount of data you need to process. So recently, again, a nice example. Recently, I was doing a job in the luxury market, luxury watches. Yeah, a very famous Swiss watchmaker. And we were discussing volumes, obviously, for the order management system. And as all of you probably understand, is the luxury segment it's highly profitable, but they don't sell many items per day. Yeah, so if they have 1,000 sales orders per day, that is probably a big number for them. Yeah, so that is probably not so much an issue. But I worked with a sports apparel company a year before this, and they said, yeah, well, we don't know, but when we get an average order, like when we create an IDOC, the IDOC is about 120 megabyte in size, and it has an average of 100,000 line items. So you probably better understand what is the data at hand that you need to process, so that you design your system in a proper way. And never underestimate network latency, how long it takes for containers to spin up, how long it takes for an SSL handshake to come up. So if that is something that you need to do for every transaction, you will most likely not meet your performance needs. So get this sorted out at the beginning, get your data volumes right, the expectation by the customer, get that understood, and then design your system accordingly. And think about integration patterns here. Yeah. So probably sometimes it's better to just wrap the interface into an async interface to hide the performance issues you might have in the backend. And obviously we have security risks. And that is like the box of Pandora. I don't really want to open that. That is probably again something for the open talk later. Remember, Salesforce is a SaaS-only solution. So it is under constant risk. The interfaces you build under constant threat and attacks. Whereas your SAP system typically runs in your own data center and typically is protected by the firewalls of your company. But as soon as you start connecting it to Salesforce, when you need to connect to that external system, and you run MuleSoft in the cloud, you probably have to poke holes in your firewalls. And that can add to the security risks. So do a proper analysis and evaluation here on what you can do to keep security risks at a bare minimum. I cannot stress that enough. Use all the API manager rules that MuleSoft gives you for free, like all the governance stuff that is in there that checks your API if it is compliant with standard security rules. Use OWASP testing for your APIs all over the place to address security risks. There's no excuse to not use HTTPS. Yeah, by the way, there's no excuse to not use MTLS if your system support that. If I ever do an audit and I find any of you not using HTTPS and MTLS, where it's probably you get an F in the exam actually. Okay, eventually user adoption is a big thing. Talk to the users from day one onwards. If they don't like what you built, you will not be successful. You become what in Germany we call it canteen speech. Yeah, people will talk to you at lunch and make fun of you, and it's always your fault. When you do integration, you know things don't work. It's always the integrator's fault. But user adoption is important. So I am typically in the business user meetings as an architect. I am not contributing, just listening, trying to understand how they work with the system, what their expectations. Yeah, I am not in a business user meeting to educate them on anything they do. I'm in those meetings to learn and understand what I can do to support the way they're working. Yeah, so user adoption really is key. We do this for the user. Limitations. I talked so much about the SAP connector by MuleSoft, and I'm heavily overrunning my speaker slot actually. I just figured that. Limitations. The SAP connector is not only great, it also has limitations. For example, there's no SNC support. SNC is the secure network connection between the SAP client, also known as the SAP connector by MuleSoft, and the SAP system. So if your SAP system requires SNC for secure connection, it is not supported in cloud app deployments because it requires a personal security environment, which requires an external DLL or SO because cloud app is running on Linux, and you cannot install it there. Yeah, there are workarounds for bring your own Kubernetes, RTF, and on-premise installations, and actually Kai, our kind host today here, I think Kai, you solved that on RTF, yeah, to be able to use SNC, and I'm just claiming you did that, so please talk directly to Kai. Okay, all right, thanks. All right, so SNC not supported. It's not that obvious from the documentation. Be aware. Don't promise you can do this if you deploy to Cloud Hub or RTF. Yeah, you can't. You can do on RTF if you talk to Kai before. So talk to Kai. The SAP Connect does not support transactions. Oh, that was a surprise. Well, that basically means if you receive IDOCs, like SAP can send you register as an RFC destination. SAP sends you in a single batch 20 IDOCs. Your Mule runtime chokes on that. It goes out of memory and crashes. Yeah, bad luck. This is not transaction secure. You just lost these 20 IDOCs. I mean, obviously, you can go back to the SAP administrator and ask to republish the IDOCs. But you just lost them, and you have no way to recover. They're just gone. And this is what I hate the most about the SAP connector. So it is not a transactional connector. I don't know why. I hate it. I created support requests. I hope they fix it. Yeah. So don't promise that it can do transactions. And if you deploy into Cloud Hub, if you deploy into private spaces, if you deploy into your own RTF cluster on AKS, EKS, whatever, and you are not on a VPN, yeah, so you don't have a VPN link to your SAP system, you have to use a fixed IP for your SAP system API that you deploy in MuleSoft, because the SAP admin needs to whitelist your IP. And they hate whitelisting Class A or B networks, public networks. You really don't want to talk to an SAP admin and asking them to do this. They ask for a /32 IP address that they whitelist. And the only way to get this in MuleSoft is you use one of the assigned fixed IPs you have, or if you use AKS, find a way to always come along via this. So you basically use NAT to have that fixed IP address, which is presented to the SAP gateway. The easier option is you set up a VPN, and then you get a network segment assigned from their corporate network. And then typically SAP admins are a bit more relaxed on giving you something there. But be aware of these 3 limitations when it comes to the SAP connector. I haven't really seen a limitation similar to this on the Salesforce connector side, but these are the 3 biggest things I've seen on the SAP side. All right. Okay. Next slide is talking. I promise we're going to talk about AI. Yeah. So I just want to, obviously, ChatGPT is in everybody's ears and eyes today, and I'm sure all the audience here is using out all the different tools out there. And we at Integration Matters and in the Sales 5 group, we are also evaluating AI tools to support us in our daily work. And we found things that really work well, and we found even more things that don't work at all. MuleSoft is a niche product, and that means most of the AI tools don't really understand what a flow is, and some of them understand certain data structures. But what we found out is, and I highly encourage you to do this, is these tools are really, really, really helpful in, for example, generating documentation, or help you in building, probably building RAMLs. And I just want to show you something. Yeah, I hope this works. I put this together like half an hour before my presentation, and what I want is I want to use ChatGPT to become my technical documentation writer. Yeah, so I created a little prompt and said, hey, do you want to become my technical documentation writer for a YAML data type? I will give you a YAML data structure that represents a purchase order. And I want you to help me with the documentation, basically. And all I do is I put the SAP table field, the table and field in the description. I want you to come up with a proper description and a proper example. Yeah, so that's the prompt I'm using. And then typically ChatGPT thinks a bit, and sooner or later it hopefully says, yeah, let's go for it. Okay, so it says, okay, give it to me. And yeah, I'm still thinking. Okay, please provide me the YAML structure. Okay, I give it the YAML structure. And so I just scroll to the top. So you see, I prepared it and said, okay, it's an order. I want to have a property that's called delivery block. And this is the SAP table. And that is the field inside the table that I think represents the delivery block. I want to have a few enums here representing these. I do the same for the purchase order date. It comes from here and from that field. And so, yeah, so I just send that RAML. Because I'm a lazy person, I don't really like writing descriptions. And now ChatGPT actually does that for me. Yeah, so you see the description is replaced. Like it keeps the reference to the SAP field. And now it says, hey, this is the delivery box status for the sales document, or hey, this is the date when the purchase order was created. And it just does that basically by giving it the SAP field name. And if you're subscribed to ChatGPT and you can use the browser plugin, you can even ask it to go to certain dictionary web pages for SAP and retrieve the metadata from there, and then the descriptions will become even better. I have another prompt. We can also try the other prompt once it's done here with this. I think you get the idea, so I just stop generating. So let's get a new chat. I have another prompt where I just say, hey, you know what? It's pretty much the same. I say, hey, ChatGPT, please create the RAML for me for order. And I will just give you a list of SAP fields, and you do all the rest for me. Yeah, and just tell me when you're ready. Okay, it says it's ready, and I just give it a list of the SAP fields. Yeah, so you probably see it's the same Vertriebsbeleg Kopf for the German speakers in the audience. So sales order, header information. You see there's also some customized field here. It's Incoterms, the ZZ Inco. And you just give it a list of fields. And what it does, it creates the full rammer for me. Yeah. Sometimes it's better, sometimes it's worse, but this is a worse example because it just used the SAP keys as the field keys. But I think you get the idea. Yeah. So when you use AI tools nowadays in a proper way, I always tell all the colleagues, they will not make us obsolete, but they will empower us. They will help us delivering higher quality documentation, higher quality designs. And why should I look up all these SAP codes? If that is what my customer gives me and says, these are the 5 fields and 5 tables, why not have ChatGPT or other tools generate the rammer for me? And yes, me as a human being, I still need to rationalize. I still need to do the quality check here. But at least I get rid of all the typing. And that will increase our productivity. And now we can focus again on the more important things, and that is integration patterns, integration options, and all these kind of things. And with this, and by just overrunning my time slot by just 30 minutes, I think, and thank you for your patience. My question is, did we meet our objectives? Did we do well? And apart from that, I say thank you